Good morning, everyone. I wanted to take some time this cloudy and overcast and cool early summer morning to talk a bit about my sour cherry cultivation. Those trees that I'm showing you are about 8 meters tall, and you probably can't see that on the video, but they have very heavy fruit set. Those are what they call here wild sour cherry. I don't think there's anything wild about it because the fruits are very nice. We have many uses for them. We make jam and syrup and like a sweet sour cherry liqueur. But I think that's just to make a distinction with the cultivated varieties. And one of the specifics of this tree is that it produces lots of suckers. Lots and lots of suckers. You can see our elderflower here. The last blooms are on now as an understory. And lower below, those are some saplings which are suckers from those two trees up here. Those two trees were actually one tree many years ago, which was cut down, and those are the main two stems that were allowed to grow. So here we have a few suckers, and I'll explain now what I do with them, how do I use them. In the first year they appear, they grow like this at about 1 meter tall and pencil thin. If they're in the deep shade like here, that could take 2 years. And by the end of June, early July, I make a pass on them with the pruning shears and remove all the side branches. In this case, I'll be leaving just the growing tip and removing all those little side branches. So you get like a single whip, and it continues to grow and puts out some new side branches in the second year when I repeat the procedure. And usually by the third year you get a tree like this one here in the center, which is about 150 to 160 centimeters up here to the first crotch, which I allowed to grow. I removed the main tip. This cut was made sometime early in the second year, and this allowed it to make nice little crown and even have some fruit set on it, which we'll pick this summer. And after we pick the fruit, I just cut down the tree from the base down here, usually with branch loppers as close to the ground as possible. And then we use those as stakes for the garden: tomato stakes, peas, cucumbers, etc. So usually this is the thickness of a 3-year-old, a little bit in the shade. This one was a bit crooked. I think I maybe trimmed it a bit when it was little, or the growing tip was removed. But anyway, you can see the difference between the 3-year-old and a 2-year-old, which has some branches left, and this will fruit next year. Along the fence here with our neighbors, I have done a similar treatment, and you can see the difference in leaves here and here. It's where I grafted sweet cherries on top. I'm experimenting here with many different varieties local from the village. And even here by the compost, we have this 3-year-old tree, which I grafted a little cherry last year, and it already has some fruit on it. I think it's a Bing or a Van cherry next to the compost. And down here is the main mass of the root suckers, which I'm allowing or promoting to grow downwards, so we can get like a fence line of those. And the way I do that is by each year allowing a few of them to move downwards by not cutting them. And in 6 years I've moved maybe 5 meters or something like that, but it goes slow because I harvest most of the trees for stakes for the garden. And you can see here a nice example. This is a much thicker one, which also has some fruit on it. This was also allowed to grow and cultivated for 3 years, and it's a selection of ages and sizes. You have some 2 years old here, a new growth from this year. This was last year but died. Those are also this year sprouting all from the same spot, which was probably cut last year. And back here in the tall grass, there are more of those. So after I cut the stem at the base down there, I just remove the branches, use those in the compost, pick the fruit if there are any, and use the stakes in the garden next year. This also allows time to dry, because if you use those stakes when they're cut fresh in the early spring, you can have them root in the soil, which may not be a bad thing if you want to propagate them this way. You can see how densely I've allowed them to grow here. It's a 3-year-old and 2 years old. Some of them are weaker because they're all from the same root. And I'll be removing this one this year, those two next year, and those two in 2 years time. Some of them I may be leaving and grafting into cherries, just to have a nice big shady cherry tree. And although the people here locally rather dislike this species because of its suckering habit and the need to constantly stay on top of it, it's actually a great biomass tree. If you have like goat, it's a vigorous producer, and also it has great wood. And you can even grow it to about 6 or 7 years old and use the thicker poles for support or some simple structures. It's not really rot resistant, but it's fast growing and fruit producing, so I rather like those. And I'll just try to continue here downwards. This is an empty plot, and this is where we store our straw bales. And I hope that one day this will be filled naturally with black locust and wild plums. You can see over here I left a few of them to grow, which will be grafted. Down here is another wild plum, which I'll be making into possibly an apricot or a peach next year, because it's very sheltered from the forest. And I always try to use the natural resource when it's available. And The main thing that I do is kind of nudge nature in a direction that is more suitable to our needs without actually hindering the development and the progression. So I envision in 10 or 20 years time we'll be having more of those tall trees, which also don't cast very dense shade because you can see the crowns are rather sparse. And I hope that one day we'll have the similar thing here down the border of the plot. In a month's time, when the sour cherries are ripe, I'll take it to see how I cut and process those suckers, and and how we pick and process the sour cherries into several different products. That's it from me this morning, and see you in the next one.